Well, as Professor Morgan introduced me, I work as an archaeologist for the Greek Ministry of Education and Culture in the 11th Ephorate of Prehistoric and Classical Antiquities. I would like to thank you all for coming, and especially Professor Morgan for inviting me to the British School of Athens in the first place. I would also like to apologize beforehand for my less than perfect English. This presentation examines the Roman imperial building complexes in the Balkans during the period of the Tetrarchy, AD 284 till 313, but only those that pertain to the deification of the Eastern emperors and their relatives. These are the ones that interest us here. They consist of a total of 4 excavated complexes found in 3 modern states: Split, ancient Spalatum on the coast of Croatia, Gamzigrad, ancient name is Felix Romuliana, and Šarkamen, a modern name. They are both in northeastern Serbia, and Salonica in northern Greece. I'll start with a historical overview. The Emperor Diocletian, that's a bust of Diocletian from Constantinople, took as a co-emperor a second Augustus, Maximianus, and later 2 junior Caesars, Galerius and Constantius I, later known as Constantius Chlorus. He is the father of Constantine the Great. The 2 Augusti, that is Diocletian and Maximianus, each had a Caesar as an assistant. In the east, Diocletian had Galerius, and in the west, Maximianus had Constantius. This regime, known today as the Tetrarchy, was sealed by intermarriage between the families of the co-emperors, and it was secured from a religious point of view, since every emperor was under the protection of a god. Diocletian, as the senior Augustus, was protected by Jupiter, the chief god of the official Roman pantheon. The second Augustus, Maximianus, was under the protection of Hercules, a deified hero, but nevertheless a son of Zeus. Galerius Caesar, coming under Diocletian, was also protected by Jupiter. He was a Jovian. And Constantius, by the same token, was protected by Hercules. He was a Herculean. The 4 tetrarchs from Venice. The deities in question dominate the reverses of the coins of the first tetrarchy, and the imperial names, Iovi and Herculi, are well known from the panegyrics and inscriptions of the period. This is a coin that depicts the busts of Diocletian and Maximianus. They are shown sacrificing underneath the statues of Jupiter and Hercules. After 20 years of rule, Diocletian abdicated from the throne along with Maximianus on the 1st of May 305. His place was taken in the east by Galerius, while in the west Maximianus was succeeded by Constantius. Despite Galerius being the strongman of the second tetrarchy, the senior emperor was officially Constantius. The 2 retired Augusti, now named Seniores Augusti, left for their villas, Maximianus for Italy, and Diocletian for a palace he had built on the coast of Croatia at modern Split. After about 1 year, on the 25th of July 306, Constantius died in Britain, in Eburacum, York, and his soldiers declared his son Constantine to be his successor. Galerius, now the senior Augustus, accepted Constantine's appointment, but only as regards the rank of Caesar. Thus, a 3rd tetrarchy was created, in which Severus, until then Caesar of the West, became the Herculean Augustus of the West, while Constantine became the Herculean Caesar. However, 3 months later, this forced elevation of Constantine to the purple triggered a sequence of events in Italy that upset the tetrarchic order. Galerius attempted to impose taxation on Italy south of the river Po, which up to then had been exempted, a measure which sparked a mutiny in Rome. The Praetorian Guard in Rome declared Maxentius, son of the abdicated Maximianus, invincible prince on the 28th of October 306. He immediately called his father Maximianus back to power, was promoted by him to Augustus, defeated and killed the western Augustus Severus, and finally forced the eastern Augustus Galerius out of Italy. Constantine entered into an unsteady alliance with Maximianus and Maxentius, married the daughter of the former and sister of the later Fausta, and in his turn was proclaimed Augustus by Maximianus, probably towards the end of 307. These events left the empire practically divided in two, with the legitimate half of the Tetrarchy under Galerius ruling the east, and an ad hoc secessionist regime coordinated by Maximianus ruling the west. It is important to realize that the erection of the four Balkan complexes that will be presented here started while there existed a stable regime, the First Tetrarchy, but was completed while the Balkans were controlled by the heirs of that regime, who were threatened by the secession of the western half of the empire and to which they no longer had access. The Roman Empire has been described very succinctly, in my opinion, as a combination of the Mediterranean basin, which was the economic powerhouse of the empire, with a long military zone or frontier belt that started in Britain in the north, followed the river Rhine and then the river Danube, and through Asia Minor reached the eastern limes of Armenia, Syria and Mesopotamia. The tetrarchs moved along this militarized belt and rarely or never ventured out of it towards the interior. It is along this zone, astride the main imperial roads that run parallel to the frontier, that they built the so-called imperial capitals from which they controlled the frontier. They were followed there by their comitatus, that is, their administrative apparatus and their field army. In the Balkans, these capitals were Sirmium in Pannonia and Serdica, modern Sofia of Bulgaria, in Thrace. Many scholars consider that Thessalonica, the capital of the Roman province of Macedonia, must be included in these capitals, despite its position in the interior, far from the military roads on the frontier. With this opinion, I respectfully disagree, and do not think that Thessalonica was ever a tetrarchic capital, but more on that later. All the aforementioned emperors hailed from the Balkans. Specifically, Dalmatia, that was the birthplace of Diocletian, Pannonia, that was the birthplace of Maximianus, Dacia Ripensis, that was the home of Galerius, and Maesia, that was the home of Constantius. Because of this, they are included in the so-called Illyrian emperors that ruled continuously the Roman Empire from the murder of Gallienus, 268, till the sole rule of Theodosius I, the Great, in 383. This is a total of 113 years. In my opinion, they should be better called the Illyriciani emperors, since they were not Illyrians per se, but rather from mixed background. They just hailed from the Roman province of Illyricum. The name of Balkan emperors could describe them fittingly as well. In this presentation, I'll concentrate in 4 Balkan sites that are closely connected with the tetrarchs, not from an administrative, but from a religious point of view. They are the burial and consecration sites of themselves or their close relatives, and are connected with the last phase of Greco-Roman paganism as the official state cult of the deified emperors. These, as mentioned before, are Gamzigrad and Šarkamen in Serbia, Split in Croatia, and Salonica in Greece. I'll start my presentation in an unorthodox way, by presenting first Gamzigrad, or Romuliana, as was then known, which is less well known than Split or Salonica, because in contrast to them, it was left uninhabited since antiquity and kept the original plan more or less intact. Split and Salonica were continuously inhabited and therefore have been built over time and again. The findings at Gamzigrad will therefore present parallels that might solve problems at Split and Salonica for which we do not have local evidence. Moreover, I have participated in the excavations there for at least 12 periods in the late 90s, and I have first-hand experience both of the excavation and the territory. Until recently, much less attention had been given to the Roman fortified site in Gamzigrad, ancient Romuliana, in the distant hills of contemporary Serbia. There, excavations that started in 1953 and continue till today have revealed that the main antiquities of Gamzigrad constitute an architectural complex that combines the characters of a fortified imperial luxury residence, a palace if you will, or the ancient predecessor of a medieval castle, with that of an imperial mausoleum, like the ones found in Rome for most of the emperors since the 1st Augustus. Ultimately, the architectural complex in Gamzigrad has been identified with the ancient Felix Romuliana, a site known in ancient written sources as the birthplace and burial site of the Emperor Galerius. That place was so named to honor Galerius' mother Romula. After Galerius' death and burial there, the fortifications were used by the local population till the late 6th century, when they were finally abandoned because of the Avar and Slav invasions. The site was mentioned one last time in antiquity in Procopius' buildings, Perictismaton, when it was fortified anew by the Emperor Justinian in the middle of the 6th century. The ancient complex is located 1.5 kilometers southeast of the modern village of Gamzigrad and about 60 kilometers west of the modern Serbian-Bulgarian boundary and within 35 kilometers south of the river Danube. In antiquity, it belonged to the province of Dacia Ripensis that had been created by the Emperor Aurelian in 274 when he abandoned the original Roman province of Dacia north of the Danube and transferred its population to the south of the river. The buildings were erected as two separate groups. The first group consists of a walled complex that was built on slightly folding ground between two small rivers. This position is dominated by the hills which rise to the east and to the west of the walled complex in a general north-south direction. Essentially, that is, the walls rise in the lower part of a valley, created by parallel hill ranges. The second group of buildings is situated around a kilometer east of the walled complex onto the so-called Magura hill that dominates the interior of the valley. In the early 19th century, and specifically in 1835, the German Baron von Herder, who was conducting surveys of the Serbian mineral wealth, met with and described for the first time the visible ruins at Gamzigrad. After that, in 1860, the Austrian archaeologist and traveller Felix Kanitz visited the site and sketched the ruins and the surrounding area. As you can see, they gave the appearance of a typical Roman border castellum, like the ones erected to house auxiliary military units. It was only after 1953 and the end of the upheavals after the Second World War that the Archaeological Service of Yugoslavia began conducting excavation inside the fortification. Initial findings appeared to corroborate the first impressions. Apart from a Slavic cemetery of the 11th century, consisting of about 60 burials in the southern part of the fortified site, the findings confirm that the ancient settlement was finally abandoned in the early 7th century, around 615, when the northern Balkans passed from the control of the Romans, or Byzantines if you prefer, to the Avars and Slavs. Under the final destruction layer, the following successive layers were revealed from the surface downwards. A mixed Slavic and Roman phase that covered the 30 years between 580 and 615. Then, around 580, a second destruction level was found. the destruction ended an early Byzantine phase from 580 to about 500. This is depicted in blue color, to which belonged two great Christian basilicas, built with spolia from earlier Roman buildings. Then came a late Roman phase of the later 4th century, until about 400, which ends with a third destruction level. In that layer belongs another earlier large Christian basilica. This is in green color. And finally, the initial phase of the fortified complex that extends from the last 5 years of the 3rd century to the 2nd decade of the 4th century. These are the red and orange colored buildings. This phase has been a great surprise for the excavator, because despite all the fortifications, this was not a common Roman army camp, which at some point had evolved into a fortified settlement. Rather, it was a fortified palace built in 2 phases. First was erected a fortification wall with 16 small rectangular or octagonal towers. This is the first fortification wall. It is completely enclosed into a second, bigger fortification wall that has 20 huge bastion-like 16, 12 or 10-sided towers. Yet these 2 walls are separated by less than 10 years. This later wall has been dated to about 306 to 311 because of coins found in the mortar of the foundations under the ground floor of one of the polygonal towers. And these had been issued between 308 and 311. Therefore, the fortification cannot be earlier than 308 at these points. Moreover, other coins which had been issued between 309 and 311 have been found in the substratum of the floor mosaics of the so-called Palace 1. This is Palace 1. This palace is contemporaneous with the later fortification and later than the internal earlier fortification. Inside the walls were erected 2 pagan temples with altars, 2 palace complexes, a bath, a horeum, and other auxiliary buildings. One can see how huge and monumental were the towers of the later external fortification by approaching the west entrance of the complex, the Porta Decumana of the complex. We approach this way. This is the west, this is east. These are the 2 huge bastion-like towers that flank the main entrance. The gate itself, now heavily, this is one of the 2 towers, and this is the gate. The gate itself, now heavily restored, is flanked by 2 apsidal niches that held now lost statues, one of the niches. These towers might originally be more than 15 meters high, since they were 2-storied, but were apparently never completed since no tiles had been found during the excavation. This is an axonometrical depiction of the towers. You can also see the appearance of the wall. The polygonal towers at the 4 corners were 16-sided, those in the middle 10-sided. The wall has the appearance of opus mixtum with layers of local green stone. They call it Gamzigrad. It is a variety of andesite, alternated with courses of bricks. An interesting observation is that at places the wall was hastily repaired, perhaps during the 6th century. You see, this is an ancient addition because the wall there was demolished, perhaps from another siege machine. The east and west sides of the wall have a length of about 200 meters, the north 220 meters and the south 234. Overall, the area of the walled area amounts to approximately 4.3 hectares. The towers of the interior, earlier war, are different. They are 16 in total, 4 octagonal towers and 12 with a square ground plan. The 4 octagonal towers protect the 2 gates, These and 4 square towers at the 4 corners project from the wall completely. The remaining 8 square towers are met by the wall at about midpoint on the lateral sides of the towers. The masonry of the towers is made exclusively of bricks to the height of 3 meters. Then the masonry is made of rubble in successive zones reinforced with bricks. We conjecture that the towers were at least 2-storied and were up to 18 meters high. These are the earlier internal towers, and you can see how between the 2 earlier towers the later wall is seen. The main route was never paved nor defined with arcades, stoas or such. The Serbs have transformed the one fully excavated 12-sided external tower, this is tower number 19, into a sort of museum or glyptothek with reconstruction of architectural ornaments from the 2nd floor of the towers. This is the stair leading to the 2nd floor, and these are architectural ornaments that were either from the 2nd level of the wall or over the main western gate. Inside the walls, I intend to present the findings in a sort of slideshow with comment. The main complex of the palace, found in the north half of the enclosed area, is found in the north half of the enclosed area. It consists of colonnaded porticos as well as rooms and corridors placed as ambulatories around 3 peristyle courts. This is the first peristyle court. This is the second peristyle court. A few of the rooms have a circular or trefoil ground plan, like this room in front of the peristyle court. This is perhaps a triclinium, a dining chamber. The walls had marble facings and the floors were covered with mosaics. You can see that the start of the marble facing has been preserved in some places. There were 2 classical temples, a small one in the north, surrounded by the palace buildings, and its podium has been very well preserved. In front of it and to the east of it have been found the remains of an altar. That's the altar in front of the podium of the temple. That's the altar, and the whole is to be reconstructed as a classical Roman temple. Facade and the ground plan. The second temple was larger and situated to the south half of the enclosed area. That's the second temple, the bigger one. That's the first one, which you just saw. This has not been as well preserved and has a double crypt. These lead to the crypt. In front of it and to the east have been found the remains of an altar. It is to be reconstructed again as a Roman temple with high podium, but I disagree with the way that the Serbs have tried to make a reconstruction. This is the Serbian one, as a 2-storied. I think that they are led to this because of the 2 types of columns that have been found. In my opinion, it might be like this. Finally, in the southern half were constructed some auxiliary buildings, including the baths. These are the baths, and the whole complex might have a very impressive appearance, as evidenced by the plaster model that is exhibited in the museum of the nearby city of Zaječar. The second group of buildings is found on the so-called Magura. Ma is big, Gura is hill. That is a big hill, located east and at a distance of about 1 kilometer from the east gate of the palace complex. This is the palace complex. Immediately to the east is the complex, the memorial complex on the Magura hill. If we stand in the palace, we can see the complex on top of the hill here. If we stand on the hill, here on the hill, we can see the architectural complex of Gamzigrad, the palace and the temples inside the valley. That hill rises with its summit to a height of 256 meters above sea level and approximately 60 meters above the average level of the palace. It is a north-south elongated hill which offers a wide view to the level of the modern provincial capital of Zaječar, where in ancient times ran the major roads to Serdica and Naissus. The excavations were conducted by a Serbian team of archaeologists from 1989 to 1993, and very soon found out that the round structures on top of the hill were not towers, but the remains of two mausolea. On the southern half of the ridge, 4 objects were excavated which have no uniform alignment. A smaller tumulus 1 lies in the north, a larger tumulus 2 lies in the south, as well as the remains of a smaller mausoleum. This is the core of the podium of the mausoleum, mausoleum number 1 in the north, a large mausoleum, the mausoleum number 2 in the east. The 2 tumuli are located directed towards the west side of the palace complex down at the valley. The largest tumulus had a diameter of about 40 meters, the smaller one of about 30 meters. This is the half-excavated tumulus number 2, the big one. And this is how it would have appeared, the 2 tumuli and their connected mausolea as soon as they had been finished. The present remains of the mausolea are mostly their opus cementicum core of their 2 podia, until only a few remains of the stone architecture have been preserved, such as a few sandstone blocks that indicated that most mausolea had an outer shell made of these. The mausoleum number 1 had a square base with a side length of 9 meters. Mausoleum number 2 had a 12-sided base with an external diameter of 11 meters. Both mausolea had high podiums which surrounded the grave chamber. This, in both cases, was only designed for a single burial. Inside the podium of the northern mausoleum 1 lies a very narrow grave chamber with a dimension of 85 cm times 1 meter and 75 cm, built with bricks. This is the grave chamber of mausoleum number 1. Eventually, the mausoleum had the form of an octagonal tower that rises onto the rectangular podium to an estimated height of 14.3 meters. And that's the axonometric reconstruction with the burial chamber in the middle. This mausoleum was still intact at the end of the 4th century because a treasure of coins of the late 4th century, that is 100 years after it was constructed, had been found buried at the southwest corner. The mausoleum, like its neighbor, seems that it was looted and destroyed during the Gothic wars of the late 4th or early 5th century. The southern mausoleum, the bigger one, number 2, is larger and is located approximately 45 meters southeast of the first. Inside the circular foundation, which has a radius of 5 meters, rises a 12-sided podium to a height of 3.25 meters. Inside the podium is found a crypt that was accessible through a door. In the middle of the crypt rose a rectangular sarcophagus-like tomb built of bricks. Externally, on top of the podium stood a cylindrical cella surrounded by a colonnade, a pteron, of 12 unfluted columns with Ionic capitals. Remains of these had been found in situ or built as spolia in the Byzantine phase of the palace. The columns had a height of 4 meters and a maximum diameter of 50 centimeters. The total height of the mausoleum has been estimated to reach about 15 yards. The top of the Magura hill, however, was not chosen to be a mons sacer by chance. The 2 tumuli covered a total of 31 prehistoric graves that extended to an area of 3.5 square kilometers. These are the prehistoric graves that have been found at the floor level of the tumulus, the bigger tumulus. The choice of the hill was made, therefore, with this sacred cemetery in mind, and this directly influenced the positioning of the walled palace, which was directly to the east of the mausolea, so that each day they are bathed in the rays of the rising sun and are delineated in the orb of the rising sun to all those who watch the sun rising from the palace complex in the bottom of the valley. These are the urns, the prehistoric urns, where the ancient dead have been buried. And this is the location of the tombs underneath the two consecration tumuli. Moreover, after the internal structure of the two tumuli could be examined in more detail, it has been found out that apart from traces of fire, underneath the fire level were the holes for wooden posts with a diameter of about 30 centimeters. In Tumulus II, it could still be observed that these post holes were arranged in 5 rows that described a rectangular area of about 30 yards. These are the post holes. Among the holes were found metal objects such as nails and metal rings, useful in a wooden construction that has been established to be a scaffolding for a funeral pyre, a robus, as the Romans called it, during a deification ceremony or consecration. These are models of such constructions from Roman coins, and this is a reconstruction of what this scaffolding would have looked like in Gamzigrad. It is certain that a deification ceremony took place there, and one tumulus is dedicated to the mother of Galerius, Romula, the smaller one, and the other to Galerius himself. This is a consecration coin of Galerius, struck in the mint of Thessalonica. The inscription runs Divo Maximiano, because his official name was Maximianus, to the deified Maximianus. And the inscription, this is a mausoleum with an eagle on top, runs Mem Divi, that is Memoria, Eterna Memoria, Divi Maximiani. In addition to the 4 monuments on top, these are the 4 monuments, the 2 tumuli, the 2 mausolea, there was also a tetrapylon at the base of the hill. And this is not visible from the palatial complex because of the lay of the land. This is the tetrapylon. This rises to a distance of 230 meters northeast of the northern mausoleum and is inscribed into a rectangle. It is built with 4 pillars that rise on 4 independent foundation platforms measuring 360 yards to the side, and the 4 pillars have an approximately rectangular ground plan with a side of approximately 2.85 meters. They consist of a core of rubble and mortar lined with limestone blocks. It has been estimated that the tetrapylon had a height comparable to that of the 2 mausolea, that is around 15 meters, including the roof. Regarding the findings of statues, mosaics and other small finds in Gamzigrad, I'll let the slides speak for themselves. A complete cornice from the east gate, a part of a broken cornice from the eastern gate had this inscription that made the identification of the site possible. It reads Felix Romuliana. A lintel from the east gate with a military standard, a signum, with 6 tetrarchs. There are 2 on top, 2 in the middle, and 2 lower. These are supposed to be the 2 seniores, that is the retired Augusti, Diocletian and Maximianus, the 2 reigning Augusti, Constantius and Galerius, and the 2 reigning Caesar, Severus and Maximinus. But other people might replace and be identified with the figures as they died out and were replaced. The same in a more clear photograph. And as you see, the senior of each pair is slightly taller. A broken part of another lintel. A head of a porphyry tetrarch from the area of the baths, most probably Galerius himself. Marianne Bergman, which is an expert, thinks his beard might be painted on. But I think that since he is at home, having returned from his campaign, he would have appeared cleanly shaved. He is being crowned by a victory, a victoriola, that's the hand of the victory. And his crown has the busts of 4 protector gods, the comites of the tetrarchs: Jupiter, Hercules, Mars, and Sol, Helios. He was holding a globe in his left hand, a head of a statue of Jupiter, a head of a statue of Hercules, the torso of Aesculapius, lower torso of the goddess Minerva, another lower torso probably of Hermes or Apollo, Ariadne, a tetrarch on a horse. He has this very Balkanic cap, Pileus Pannonicus, that was characteristic for the Illyrian troops of this era. He holds a double-headed axe, and he is followed by a bodyguard who looks like the ones from the Arch of Galerius in Thessaloniki. Various metal objects, such as weights or locks, have been found from the towers. A spearhead and 3 late Roman darts, small javelins, they are called martiobarbuli. The complex was built by the legionaries of the 5th Macedonian Legion. This is an inscribed brick of its 4th cohort. It reads leg, legio, quinta, this is 5, which is upside down, M, upside down, Macedonita, C, cohorts, and number 4, the 4th cohort out of the 10 cohorts that comprise the legion. This is the axonometric reconstruction of the main palace around peristyles 1 and 2. Its ground plan, probable appearance. All the floors had mosaics, much better than the mosaics from the palace of Salonica, I can tell you. Among them was Dionysus, a mosaic of hunters, and the labyrinth. Now on to Croatia and Split. Split is the largest Dalmatian town, the second largest urban center in modern Croatia. Diocletian built a massive palace at the turn of the 4th century in preparation for his retirement on 1st of May 305. His palace lies in a bay on the south side of a short peninsula running out from the Dalmatian coast 4 miles from Salona, the capital of the Roman province of Dalmatia. It was rediscovered only in the 18th century. It became again known to the west. The palace is built of white local limestone and marble of high quality, most of which was from marble quarries on the island of Brač, of tuff and of bricks made locally. Some material for decoration was imported: Egyptian granite for the columns and sphinxes, fine marble for revetments, and some capitals produced in workshops in the Proconnesus. The ground plan of the palace is an irregular rectangle with towers projecting from the western, northern, and eastern facades. These are the ancient foundations that have been unearthed underneath the modern town of Split in the excavations since the 18th century, while the original completed ground plan is like this. This ground plan combines the qualities of luxurious villa with those of a military camp. with huge gates and watchtowers. The palace is enclosed by walls, and at later times it housed over 9,000 people. Subterranean portions of the palace featured barrel vaults. Only the southern facade, which rose directly from or very near to the sea, was unfortified. This is the southern facade. It has no tower because most probably it was licked by the waves of the sea. While this is the northern facade, and it's very heavily fortified and protected. The elaborate architectural composition of the arcaded gallery on its upper floors, I'm referring to the gallery there, on the upper floor of the seaside facade of the wall, is very different from the more severe treatment of the three shore facades. A monumental gate in the middle of each of these walls led to an enclosed courtyard, and the southern sea gate, the Porta Aenea, was simpler in shape and dimensions than the other three, and it's thought that it was originally intended either as the emperor's private access to the sea or as a service entrance for supplies. The design is derived from both villa and castrum types, and this duality is also evident in the arrangement of the interior. The transverse road, this is called Decumanus Maximus, linking the eastern gate, the Silver Gate, or Porta Argentea, and western gate, the Iron Gate, or Porta Ferrea. This is the Decumanus Maximus. Divided the complex into two halves. In the southern half were the religious, these are temples, and the palatial arrangement for the retired emperor, while in the northern half were the barracks or other service buildings for the garrison. It is usually supposed that each part was a residual complex, housing soldiers, servants, and possibly some other facilities, and both parts were apparently surrounded by streets. Leading to perimeter walls, there were rectangular buildings, posted storage magazines, there and there. The monumental court, this one, called the peristyle, this is the arrangement for the gate that leads from the north side to the monumental court. It had statues, this is its present condition, and when one crossed this and arrived in front of the peristyle, had this in front of it. This formed the northern access to the imperial apartments. It also gave access to the so-called Diocletian's mausoleum to the east, here, now the Cathedral of St. Dominus, and to three temples to the west, two of which are now lost, the third having become a baptistery. This is a reconstruction of the peristyle court. One went through these steps into the apartments of the emperor. If through these gates he turned to the left or to the right, he entered two temple precincts. Again, this is the peristyle. This is the big temple, which is nowadays the Cathedral of St. Dominus, and these are three smaller tables, and these are the apartments of the emperor. One of the temples, the modern baptistery, this one, is a classical Roman temple with podium. The other two, now lost, were rotundas. The larger temple, that's the smaller temple, and the two rotundas. This is the side view of this temple and its reconstruction along with the two rotundas. The larger octagonal temple, the cathedral, has this appearance from the side, It is a massive rotunda with a crypt underneath. Its decoration includes a frieze with 3 out of the original 4 medallions with the busts of Diocletian, his wife Prisca, and the god Hermes. This is how it appears today, and this is the bust of Diocletian from the frieze inside at the bottom of the Tholos. The emperor's apartments formed a block along the seafront and were situated above a substructure because the sloping terrain demanded significant differences in level. Although for many centuries almost completely filled with refuse, most of the substructure is well preserved and indicates the original shape and disposition of the rooms above. A comparison of Split with Gamzigrad makes evident the similarities of the two complexes, especially the original earlier wall of Gamzigrad, whose 16 towers were identical with those of Split. They have similar dimensions, and as one approaches in Split from the northern gates, he sees the peristyle court, while someone who approaches from the eastern gate in Gamzigrad sees a similar entrance to the palace complex. And the smaller towers, the ones that had not been used really, are identical with the towers that fortify Split. The original face of Gamzigrad was a copy of Split. To the third complex. Just after the excavation of the Mons Sacer of Magura at Gamzigrad, another important monumental complex from the period of the Tetrarchy was discovered nearby in northeast Serbia. The site is called Vrelo Šarkamen, literally spring of colored stone. It's found about 4.5 kilometers to the west of the village of Šarkamen and about 20 kilometers west of the city of Negotin, at the northeastern corner of Serbia and almost on the borders of this country with Bulgaria. The site is located about 42 kilometers to the northeast of Gamzigrad. The name Vrelo, source or spring, comes from the springs of nearby river Vrelshka, located in a cave about 3 kilometers southwest of the site. The Šarkamen complex consists of an interconnected group of monumental fortification, a mausoleum, a consecration tumulus, a porphyry statue, and various auxiliary buildings. This is what have been found there. They were constructed under imperial initiative and supervision and were driven by the same ideology which created Romuliana and Split. The first rescue excavations there were triggered by the findings of many fragments of a statue of Porphyry. The bold pieces are the first findings and the supposed reconstruction of a seated emperor in Porphyry. This had been found by farmers who ploughed the area. The systematic excavations began in 1994 and immediately brought results that were expanded in further digging campaigns till 2004. It follows that in the early 4th century, and certainly before the year 313, at the site of Vrelo Šarkamen were built in turn a mausoleum. This is number B. This is the mausoleum, the rectangular. A base. This is letter D. Perhaps for a statue. A statue of Porphyry, whose pieces I showed in the previous slide. A consecration tumulus, which is C. And a quadrangular fortified enceinte, which looks very much like the walls of Gamzigrad, the second later phase, but in miniature. The last project, that is the fortification, remained unfinished. These buildings formed the core of a broader construction in the area, but the exact extent of which we have not fully known yet. The presence of a statue made of porphyry, the resemblance of the architectural styles and craftsmanship of the mausoleum and fort with the respective structures at Romuliana, the resemblance of the pairing mausoleum tumulus fortress with that of Romuliana, and the fact that the work remained in both areas unfinished leads us to the conclusion that similar reasons provoked this building activity in both sites. In Vrelo Šarkamen was buried a person that was probably directly related to one of the reigning tetrarchs. Certainly, the works here were public and were made under imperial mandate and financing. When the political regime that favored them was overthrown, then the work stopped and the project remained unfinished. Yet, unlike Romuliana, in Vrelo Šarkamen it seems that the construction of all these buildings took place sometimes after the death of the important person in question. Because initially in the area, where subsequently the mausoleum was erected, there existed a small cemetery of about 7 burials. One of these graves, obviously the most important, was covered by the construction of a mausoleum. The mausoleum is B. This is the mausoleum with the grave inside. The actual burial pit is found at the edge of a cliff overlooking a river valley below it. Therefore, the mausoleum had to be built straddling it, half on the slope of the cliff below, and this required the addition of courses of stone so that it could be held in place, half on top of the cliff and half below it. Along with the mausoleum, a consecration tumulus was created, but without traces of a scaffolding such as found under the tumuli at Romuliana. This is the tumulus. In fact, the tumulus buried underneath it 5 graves pre-existing of the early 4th century that surrounded the important grave now protected under the mausoleum. Traces of burning indicate that a ceremony took place before the erection of the tumulus. Inside the grave of the mausoleum were found 36 gold objects that ranged from necklaces and beads to golden leaves impressed with the verses of tetrarchic coins. This is the core of the mausoleum, and this is one of the golden leaves impressed with a tetrarchic coin of a Maximianus. The inscription is half lost, so it could be either Maximianus Herculius, Maximianus Galerius, or even Maximinus his Caesar. Undoubtedly, this woman was directly connected to one of the tetrarchs, either Maximianus or generally the family of Galerius, including both his first wife, which he divorced in order to marry the daughter of Diocletian, or the mother of his illegitimate son called Candidianus. Or she might even be the aunt of Galerius and mother of his nephew, the Caesar Maximinus Daja, as the Serbian excavator, the original excavator, supposed. In my view, however, the data we have at our disposal at present cannot confirm this hypothesis. The excavator further believed that the many fragments of the porphyry statue found at F, they have been completed nowadays, many more have been come to light, were perhaps an indication that some, probably Christians, were particularly dissatisfied with the regime of Galerius and those associated with him, and after the overthrow of his dynasty destroyed the statue in retaliation. However, the destruction of statues after a damnatio memoriae can be both sporadic and discontinuous, and the fact that the memory of Galerius was not officially ever condemned certainly does not exclude the fact of an informal approval of the destruction of his statue at Šarkamen by Constantine, who was hostile to him and did not issue deification coins of Galerius in his domain. He might have given his approval after he took control of this region in 316. However, the fact of breaking the statues in so many little pieces, more than 300 have been found in situ, perhaps tells us the real reason for this destruction. It seems much more likely that the statue was recut in situ to another sculptural type and then transferred out of the area. It seems to me that the presence of a porphyry statue in an unfinished and abandoned complex would sooner or later cause its recutting and removal because of the preciousness and the scarcity of the stone from which it was constructed. The most important conclusion must, in my view, be inferred from the overall picture of the band of construction Šarkamens, that is, the similarity of the arrangement of the main architectural elements to those of Romuliana. Unlike Romuliana, however, where all those elements are found to coexist in a more or less completed state, those at Šarkamen were abruptly terminated at an earlier stage. So while the mausoleum and the tomb were almost completed, the fortification wall, especially the north side, remained unfinished. This remained unfinished. These are the bastions at the present condition of the fortification wall. Moreover, nothing was ever built inside. That is, they almost finished the fortification without building a single building inside it. Of course, I am certain that there were plans to erect at least a temple and an altar inside the walls, as was the case with Romuliana and Split. From that, I come to the conclusion that the most important element of the complex was the mausoleum and the tumulus, and not the wallet and saint and its contents. Moving further along this line of thought, I reached the conclusion that the primary element of all this building activity is the existence of the original tomb, since its presence at the area triggered the construction of the mausoleum on top of it. If the tomb had been somewhere else, then the mausoleum would have to be built in that location, and this would have changed the siting of the fortification wall and its contents. The construction of the complex is therefore not influenced by the life of the honored person, his birth or place of residence, but by her death. Thus, because it was a woman that was buried there, her skeletal remains were not transferred to another more convenient site, and the initial offering inside the graves were not replaced by richer ones. The tomb remained sacred and inviolable throughout the later building activity. Consequently, the complex at Šarkamen constitutes a vivid example of monumental imperial undertaking destined to honor in eternity the memory of the dead and by extension of the imperial dynasty with which she was related. And now on to Salonica. Thessaloniki, which is now the second largest city in Greece, is located on the northern shore of the Thermite Gulf in Greek Macedonia. Thessaloniki had a central function in Macedonia from the day of its foundation as a Hellenistic city, then as the capital of the Roman province of Macedonia, and as a supposed principal residence of the Tetrarchic and later emperors. It remained an important city of the Byzantine Empire. Unfortunately, Thessaloniki is yet another ancient city occupied today by a modern city. You see how the remains of the Tetrarchic Palace are surrounded by apartment buildings. In the construction boom after the Second World War, many of the archaeological sites were built over. Nevertheless, systematic excavations of certain sites in the town have made it possible to locate some of the important monuments and to establish a more or less complete picture of the ancient city. This is the center of the Hellenistic and early Roman city, and this is the so-called Galerian or Tetrarchic palatial complex that interests us here. This is transferred onto there among the many modern buildings. It's practically indistinguishable. So, all move into a cleaner depiction of the Tetrarchic remains. The only reference to an imperial palace at Thessaloniki built by Galerius is by a later and legendary text, the Passion of Saint Demetrius, 9th century. On the basis of this source and of the Arch of Galerius, which undoubtedly dates to the Tetrarchic period because of the iconography of its reliefs, more on that later, scholars generally identify the architectural remains in the southeastern extremity of Thessaloniki as part of an imperial complex. The still standing rotunda, there, This is the remains of the Arch of Galerius. This is the Hippodrome, the Circus, and these are the remains of the palace complex. The first standing tetrarchic monument in Thessaloniki, the Rotunda, is located north of the Via Regia on the axis of the Arch of Galerius. This is the Via Regia, but there are differing opinions on its course. This is the Rotunda and its ground plan. The Rotunda was originally a cylindrical building with 8 deep niches in the thickness of its wall, one of which functioned as the entrance. 8 large windows were situated above these niches. Nowadays, it has been transformed during the Byzantine period into a church, later into a mosque, and nowadays it's a museum. The second standing tetrarchic monument is the Arch of Galerius, one of the rare standing remnants of the tetrarchic period. The surviving elements of the monument are 2 of the major piers covered with reliefs and the 3rd pier from the same facade of the arch. The reliefs of the piers depict scenes from the campaign of Galerius against the Persians in 297 and other triumphal imagery. This is the present state of the arch. Some of the reliefs. I climbed on the scaffolding because they were cleaning back then when I took the photograph. And this is one which depicts Galerius and Diocletian. Galerius is in armor, he is a general. Diocletian is in garb of a from the Senate, and in between stand 2 personifications of Concordia and Ecumene, and they are sacrificed onto an altar that has Hercules and Jupiter. The remaining superstructure reveals the existence of vaulting and additional decoration. Ancient roundels and niches centered over the main piers indicate that the facade originally displayed statues, perhaps of tetrarchs or of patron deities at the upper level. The arch was originally designed as a tetrapilo, formed by relief-covered piers supporting a dome. Then, at some other time, perhaps very few years after its inception, it was transformed into an octopylon with 3 arches as evidenced by joint details of the 2 building phases and the use of 2 different kinds of mortar. According to Deifying, the Norwegian archaeologist who made the first excavations there, the Via Regia passed under the arch. This is the Via Regia. It went under the arch. And the arch was connected to the Rotunda on the north by a porticoed way. This leads to the Rotunda, which is there. And this is a mosaic-covered vestibule which leads from the Rotunda and the arch onto the palace, which is to the south. However, there are differing opinions of other scholars. For example, Velenis claimed that since there was a difference in level of at least 4 or 5 meters between the arch and the Via Regia, the old Via Regia, whose level is that, the Via Regia could not have passed underneath the arch. He therefore places the Via Regia south of the vestibule. This is the vestibule. This is the reconstruction of Velenis. He wants the Via Regia to pass to the south of this complex, and ramps should be leading onto underneath the Arch of Galerius. According to Velenis, the porticoed street connecting the arch and the Rotunda was built when the Rotunda was transformed into a church, and the rebuilding of the Arch of Galerius as an octopylon was connected with this transformation. Before that, the Rotunda was located in the middle of a sanctuary, and the arch as a tetrapylon gave access to this sanctuary from the south and to the large mosaic hall from the north. The mosaic hall, the vestibule, was not the vestibule of the palace, but the vestibule of the sanctuary of the rotunda. You see, the difference between the previous reconstruction and this is that the whole thing leads onto a connected palace complex from north to south, while this opinion says that there is a pre-existing arch and rotunda complex that has nothing to do with whatever lies south of it, and then, after a few years, a palace complex was built south of the Via Egnatia. Although no one of these reconstructions is based on secure evidence and or are highly speculative theories, in my opinion it cannot be easily accepted that the main city street leading towards the eastern gate of Thessalonica was forced to pass under the Arch of Galerius, steeply climbing a height difference of 5 meters and then steeply descending this difference on the opposite side. This is an impossibility for heavily laden ox or horse-drawn carts or wagons. The imperial palace of Thessaloniki traditionally is thought to have extended from the Via Regia, modern Egnatia Street, on the north to the coast on the south, from the Kirkus on the east to an unknown point onto the west. It extends from this vestibule to the sea, which is someplace there, and from the Kirkus to an unknown point to the west. Various parts of the palace were uncovered in the excavations of the southeastern part of the city. As mentioned before, to the north was a vast hall paved by mosaics, the vestibule. Further to the south, only a narrow band, the width of modern Gunari Street, was accessible to the excavators, and only a part of the length of this street was excavated. Here an apsidal hall was discovered. This apsidal hall, which is this. This was oriented to the south, blocking the north-south axis, starting at the rotunda and passing through the arch and the vestibule. You see, while at Split and in Gamzigrad there was an unblocked entrance towards the imperial apartments, here if one went from the rotunda, passed through the Arch of Galerius and through the vestibule, was blocked from the rest of the palace, both by perpendicular walls, these two walls, there was no entrance there, and by the vestibule. You could not go there directly, despite the fact that a huge building, a basilica, was on that north-south axis. Thus, for the Palace of Thessaloniki, we cannot speak of a straight north-south axis. Although the orientation of the buildings was primarily north and to south, this axis probably blurred when it entered the palace. The palace might have had a southern entrance and probably a facade facing the sea, as in the case of Split. Many elements turned up in the excavation of the Piazza Navarino, the Navarino Square. These are the main elements of the palace. A peristyle court, it reminds us of the ones in Gamzigrad or in Split, and a huge octagon, and baths, and the basilica. At the east, a large basilical hall opened towards the north with a series of small vaulted rooms on its west side. This is the basilica. At the west, an ambulatory was excavated surrounding a peristyle court. The peristyle court also was bordered on three sides by rooms of relatively modest dimension. The ambulatory was larger and better decorated than the rooms and was an essential element of circulation in the palace. In the southern arm of the ambulatory, a door led into a corridor with a north-south orientation. This corridor gave access to the thermae at the east and a complex of rooms dominated by a large octagonal hall at the west. These are the thermae, and this is the octagon. Even though this octagon could be accessed from the corridor, it faced south in the direction of the sea, and its principal entrance was from the south through an apsed vestibule, this one. There was also another peristyle at the eastern wall, this one, that nowadays is underneath apartment buildings, and at the eastern wall of which was located a statue niche called the Small Galerius Arch, this one. This was flanked by two medallions. These are the octagon, and this is the arch, the small arch of Galerius. That's the arch of Galerius. He has the medallion of Galerius and another female personification of Thessalonica, but it is supposed to originally depict the wife of Galerius, Galeria Valeria, the daughter of Diocletian, and then it was recut to represent the Tyche, the Fortuna of Thessalonica. There used to be conflicting views regarding the function of the palace complex of Thessalonica. And the depiction of Galeria Valeria on the small arch, Galeria Valeria, this one, was elevated to be Augusta only in 308. This dates the whole southern palace complex to that date, while the Arch of Galerius is before 305. It depicts Diocletian and only 4 tetrarchs. Therefore, there is a gap of at least 5 or even more years, at least 10, I would say myself, between the southern palace complex of Thessalonica and the Rotunda and the Arch of Galerius. In any case, the complexes at Split and Romuliana provide both parallels and direct solution to specific problems. First of all, the Rotunda of Salonica cannot have been the mausoleum of Galerius, as had been repeatedly proposed in the past. Its temenos, with the Arch of Galerius in front, remind us of the temenos at Magura, on the hill of Gamzigrad, with the tetrapylon as an entrance. This complex with the tetrapylon remind us with this Mons Sacer of Gamzigrad, while the palace remind us with the palace as a different entity, connected but different entity with Romuliana. If the similarities hold, then the palace of Thessaloniki to the south of Rotunda occupied a similar position towards it as the walled palace of Romuliana towards the Mons Sacer of Magura. The Rotunda must have been a pagan temple imitated in the Pantheon of Rome. The same must hold true of the octagon, because if it is a secular building, then no temple existed in the main palace area, when Gamzigrad had 2 temples and Split 4 temples in a much more constricted space. While it cannot be proven that there was no pre-tetrarchic Kirkus in Thessaloniki, the Kirkus at the Hippodrome, at the eastern edge of the city, was most likely a creation of the Tetrarchic period. The date of its original construction has not been proved archaeologically, but on stylistic grounds, and because of the homogeneity of its building materials and those of the other buildings of the palace complex, it can be thought of as a part of this complex. Although it is not certain that they were attached, the palace stood next to the long west side of the Kirkus. Quite recently, a rescue excavation has found the carceres. Carceres are the points from where the chariots started, and this is much to the south of the Via Regia. The carceres were found there. Therefore, there is enough room for the Via Regia to pass south of the vestibule, like Velenis supposed. And it seems probable then that the main street passed to the south of the Arch of Galerius and the vestibule connected to it. Conclusions. During the period of the Tetrarchy, in the Balkan Peninsula, birthplace of all the Tetrarchs, there are detected in historical sources or confirmed so far from the archaeological research 6 imperial building complexes. Those are Sirmium, Serdica, Split, Romuliana, Šarkamen, and Thessalonica. These complexes were not of the same kind, nor did they have a single mission to fulfill during this period. The first 2, those of Sirmium and Serdica, intended to house the emperor and his comitatus during their relatively long stay on the border. They had been used by Diocletian and Galerius, as well as other tetrarchs. Apart from the written sources that describe the imperial presence there, the two cities had characteristics shared by the rest of the late Roman imperial seats in and out of the Balkans. They were located astride the great military road, connecting east with west. They were near the border and near both the bulk of the Roman army as well as the barbarians that threatened to invade. The next three complexes, those of Split, Gamzigrad and Šarkamen, have now been extensively researched so as to highlight their mission. The first of these, Split, after its rediscovery for the West during the 18th century, became widely known as the Palace of Diocletian at Spalato. The then current research set it at the center of a debate on the form and purpose of the Roman and medieval palaces. Initially, it was seen as the quintessential Roman palace. Then over the years, successive proposition turned it into a unique sample of a transitional type of palatial villa, a precursor of the medieval feudal castle that came later. The findings of the corresponding monuments in Romuliana and Šarkamen allows us to disengage Split from the purely palatial architecture and integrate it, along with the other two Balkan complexes, into an Indiosyncratic group of tetrarchic dynastic monuments that originate from the complexes of monumental consecration pyres, ustrina, mausolea, and temples of the deified emperors that existed in Rome during the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century AD, dedicated to the earlier emperors. Now, these have been transferred to the provinces. The foremost element in these complexes is the existence of mausolea and tumuli. This priority is clear from the case of Šarkamen, in that the location of the original grave determined the positioning of all the other buildings, making them in practice secondary. We are led to the same conclusion from the location of the walled complex of Romuliana, in a straight line to the east of the Mons Sacer of Magura, and this despite the difficulties in the foundation of the walls resulting from this decision in the bottom of the valley. The hill of Magura, however, was not chosen randomly, but because there existed on top of it a prehistoric cemetery, upon which were built the tetrarchic tumuli. We effortlessly conclude that the grave and cultic elements were indeed the most important and characterized this type of dynastic monument. Parallel to that, both Split and Romuliana were intended to house the civil emperor after his retirement from office. That stay would take place in a luxurious palace whose dimensions outmatched those of the richest late Roman villas. The palaces were protected by functioning walls and were supported by many auxiliary buildings and building projects, aqueducts, workshops, quarries, and so on, both within and outside the walled area. Within the walls rose dynastic temples and altars, directly connected firstly with Jupiter as well as to the other traditional gods. As mentioned above, the mausolea, the tombs, and the surrounding precincts were situated outside the walled area, both in Romuliana and in Šarkamen. This fact, combined with our knowledge of the ancient religion, because having a temple next to a dead body was desecrating the temple, leads me to propose a corresponding arrangement at Split. I propose that the mausoleum of Diocletian is not the octagonal building, the nowadays Cathedral of Split, but must be searched for and perhaps found outside the walls of Split. And the octagonal mausoleum, in my opinion, was apparently a temple of Zeus, perhaps in conjunction with the imperial cult. And the actual mausoleum of Diocletian must be sought outside the walled complex. Moreover, the architectural type of the confirmed mausolea in Romuliana and Šarkamen requires that we reconsider our views regarding the large late Roman rotundas, such as inter alia, the rotunda and the octagon of Thessaloniki. These, before the findings of Romuliana, were deemed a priori as mausolea, following the interpretation of the octagonal temple in Split as the mausoleum of Diocletian. Now, the most convincing interpretation is that they are pagan temples imitating the Pantheon in Rome. Because of the collapse of the regime of the Tetrarchs, the founding of Constantinople, and the substitution of Christianity as the one and only state religion, the monumental complexes of the type found in Split, Romuliana, and Šarkamen had no direct successors. although they indirectly contributed, of course, to the inception and creation of Constantinople. Their temples and mausolea are the final architectural manifestation of the traditional Greco-Roman religion combined with the imperial posthumous ruler cult. The last complex, that of Thessalonica, presents certain similarities both with the provincial capitals that lay near the border, as well as the dynastic religious complexes. It seems that during the period of the Fourth Tetrarchy, from the November of 308 till May of 311, a period of 29 months, extensive reconstruction took place in Thessalonica, and the two already existing monuments, the Rotunda and the Arch of Galerius, became part of a broader complex erected at that time. It included an architectural whole, some buildings of which, the Basilica, the Kirkus, are often found in the palace complexes of confirmed seats of the Tetrarchs, such as the Treveri in Gaul, Mediolanum in Italy, Sirmium, and so on. These buildings had the obvious purpose of facilitating communication between the ruler and many of his subjects, like in the Basilica, and the provision of spectacles for them, like in the Kirkus. Thessalonica, therefore, at that time acquired at least the external appearance of a tetrarchic seat, since it combined luxury palaces, a basilica, a Kirkus, dynastic monuments such as the arches, temples, and so on. As to whether this embellishment really took place because of the transfer there of the official or actual seat of Galerius will probably never be definitely proved, especially since the personal choices of an emperor, in this case historically unrecorded, were frequently a sufficient reason, in spite of other criteria, for the upgrading or not of a city. It remains a fact, however, that the information at our disposal for the sojourn of Galerius during that period, in combination both with the geographical location of the city and with its subsequent political history, argue against this possibility. The suggestion that all this building activity had an ideological and not an administrative purpose solves the problem, in my opinion, adequately. Thessaloniki was probably embellished by this complex in order to host Galerius and other tetrarchs allied to him, Licinius and Maximinus come to mind, during the planned but never carried out celebration of his Vicenalia, the 20-year rule of his, and later during the ceremony of his abdication and his succession by his son Candidianus in imitation of Diocletian. Finally, this later suggestion certainly does not exclude the possibility that Thessalonica was at the same time, theoretically or actually, also Galerius' imperial seat during the 29 months of the Fourth Tetrarchy. From an architectural viewpoint, however, the Thessalonica complex can certainly be included in the palace complexes of the provincial seat of the Tetrarchs, since the way it was arranged facilitated communication between leader and people. On the other hand, the ideological monuments of Spalatum, Romuliana, and Šarkamen prevented this kind of contact, operating protectively for the emperor's private life. While they were still living, they were then to be turned into places of pilgrimage only after their deaths. In both kinds of complexes, administrative and dynastic, however, symbolic propagandistic elements, temples, tetrapilla, mausolea, tombs, abounded in a completely characteristic way, giving the ideological mark of the tetrarchic building program at the same time. Certainly, whatever was their practical mission, a large part of it was aimed at the ideological projection of the tetrarchic establishment. The purpose of this was the legalization, legitimation, and perpetuation of the tetrarchs by overawing their subjects with a display of strength at all levels, including the religious one. The collapse of the tetrarchy and the substitution of Christianity in the place of the official religion also led to the abandonment of these complexes in more or less incomplete condition. Those, like Thessalonica, that were finished immediately afterwards, underwent changes that redefined their ideological orientation. First of all, in favor of the dynasty of Licinius, changes, for example, that transformed the bust of Valeria Galeria on the small arch of Galerius into the Tychi of Thessaloniki, and then Constantine, for example, the completion of war on the Circus and the Octagon, and subsequently to the advances of Christianity, For example, the conversion of the rotunda into a Christian church. And that was the end of it.